We are going to move on from the big screen to the small screen today. As I have mentioned, the 80s was a golden era for horror movies. So many were coming out every week, so much so, it was hard to keep up with. Not to mention, not all of them found their way to the local video shops. During this time, we also saw a leap from cinema to our living rooms. While there were many, it was not quite at the same level. And personally, for me, I found the 90s were better than the 80s for TV horror. But the 80s paved the way, while the 90s took what worked well and polished them up a little. Some examples of this would be something like The X-Files or Buffy the Vampire Slayer series. There's something nice about watching these old horror shows directly on the TV, waiting each week for a new one to be released. You and your family or you and your friends waiting in anticipation for the opening theme song to start, rather than just sticking on a DVD or more recently, watching it online. In many ways, the internet is a horror movie to itself. It is killing the living room viewing. Perhaps some of its nostalgia. Sure, it can be. And you know what? Nostalgia is not a dirty word. Many people have demonized it. But there's nothing wrong with remembering the past, as long as you're not trapped there. I just love watching a weekly show. You and your friends would talk about it the next day and exchange your notes. Well, that's enough reminiscing. Let's move on to the first one. Coming from a hit horror franchise, and not the only one in the list today, Freddy's Nightmares. You know, this title always seemed odd to me. Is it Freddy's Nightmares as in Freddy who gives the nightmares? Or the nightmares that Freddy has? And I was wondering what would scare Krueger? Something like fluffy bunnies? Happy teens living? Perhaps skipping through a sunny meadow? I really enjoyed this series. And it's a shame that it actually only ran on for 2 years, from 1988 to 1990. Of course I loved it because it's Freddy Krueger, and Nightmare on Elm Street is one of my favorite horror movie franchise, so that stands to reasons. It's one of those anthology shows where each episode has its own story, but for the most part, most of these shows I'm talking about are like this. However, saying that, I think you should watch the first episode. Yeah, no duh, but there is a reason, because it's kind of a mini-movie prequel to the original movie. It shows Freddy as a real person before he became, the stuff of nightmares. And what he did and how he got off from his crimes on a technicality and how the townspeople burned him alive. I don't think I'm giving any spoilers because it says it in the movies. And if you haven't seen the movies, well, you're way, way behind and too many years have passed for spoilers, so tough. It's interesting to watch, but at the same time, the first episode gives almost a false pretense of the show. I was thinking this show would be all about Freddy. And yes, some parts are, but there's other episodes where he's not so much in it. He's more of like a host or a guide. Oh yeah, and by the way, it is Robert Englund playing as Freddy. The best Freddy, not the Freddy from the remakes. It has a lot of his classic lines. It has some weird moments. It has some scary parts. I thought it was very well done, but it ran too short. Oh, and here's a little bit of information for you. If you ever wondered about the classic clothes, there's a reason for it. Wes Craven, the director and creator of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, actually designed the costume after a bully who went to school wore the classic black and red sweater, while the hat was worn by a local drunk who scared him as a kid. Moving on to another huge franchise from the 80s. Well, kind of. Friday the 13th, the TV show. Now this was a masterpiece of using a name, an established name, to get viewers. But it's also a lesson to not dangle a carrot and then piss people off when you don't give them the carrot at the same time. Because, despite its name, it does not have Jason in. Well, unless you count this one small part in the episode where the boyfriend dresses in a hockey mask as a joke. Yes, That's right, you heard me. Friday the 13th with no Jason. And no, not like the first movie where it's the mum. Oh man, I was so pissed when I first found this out. I stopped watching it. I mean, come on, what the beep? However, I did go back to it and got very angry again. And that was because of why I stopped watching it. It's actually a great show. Much like Freddy's Nightmares, each one has a different story. Each episode is different and unique in its own way, but the way it's different is that it does have an overall storyline. And it has a great premise too. A girl inherits her grandfather's trinket shop. However, all the objects are cursed, and she makes some type of mistake, and somehow all these objects get displaced, move out of the shop. And it's up to her and some of the other workers in the shop to go on a mission to recover them all. A little bit like, Warehouse 13 became later on. I just love the idea behind this show. It has so many ways that it could go. The cast is very good in it. It's well written. It's well acted. Got some great little effects going on. And it borders on the crazy, the bizarre, and a little bit strange. It's definitely worth a watch. And yes, it does actually have a few creepy moments, but it also has a lot of light-hearted moments. Having said that, I would have loved the idea if the show was based on Jason traveling the world, killing campers in different places. I mean, I've just got this funny image in my head of Jason stomping through the desert, like killing the Bedouin campers by the lake oasis. I thought a premise like that could have been fun. So it's weird. It's the Friday the 13th with no Jason. Kind of like, the Halloween 3 with no Michael Myers. Okay, going on to the next one. This one is a little bit weird because actually, believe it or not, this was the first what they dubbed drama to be aired on HBO. Kind of a weird first drama for HBO to be starting with, but there it is. I call it more of a drama horror. And it's actually one of the earlier shows on the list and one of the longer lasting ones. It lasted from 1983 to 1988. So what happens if you get horror meets the Red Shoe Diaries meet Knight Rider? You kind of get The Hitchhiker. The story goes a little something like this. Each episode starts with the hitchhiker traveling, and during his trip, or the people who pick him up, he tells them a different story, a horror story. It actually has a good start structure, following this guy around. This, I don't know if he's a hobo, but at least he's hitchhiking. I just like the fact that he's telling the stories to the drivers, because how scary would that be for the driver? You pick up this random person who's telling you a horror story. It's like, did you do all these things? Now, I cannot talk too much about this one. Even though it's one of the longer running ones, I didn't see all of them, either because it was on too late, or it wasn't often aired in England, or the material was a bit too adult for kids. Not just in terms of gore and effects, but the story in general, the nudity and some of the mature content. And that's what kind of makes it the Red Shoe Diaries, especially, with him retelling the tales as well. It's not a bad show. I think there are a lot better ones, but you might want to watch a couple of episodes because in many ways, this show really set a formula for later TV shows in many different genres. And moving on to an absolute classic now, and part one of the two Tales. We're talking about Tales from the Dark Side. Oh man, this had it all. Right from the start, you had this kind of Twilight Zone feel to it with the person talking to the camera directly at you from the TV. And then you have the idea that this show was created, it was the brainchild of George A. Romero. Yes, Mr. Zombie himself. He created this show. And then you have the different authors working on the show. And that's what really makes this show shine, are the authors behind the scripts. You have the authors such as Clive Barker, Michael McDowell, John Cheever, Frederick Brown. And most of the episodes were based from the short stories that was rewritten by the aforementioned people, by none other than Stephen King himself. I mean, wow. This show, like The Hitchhiker, also lasted from 1983 to 1988. Like most shows, not all were bangers, but when they were, they really were good. A big thing about this show, like I said, it was the script and the actors do a very good job in it. If you like weird, this has some really weird moments, like the man who feeds women to his couch, who then dates a woman who feeds men to her fridge. I mean, what? It's a fun watch. There's some creepy and often even some scary moments in it. There's just some really hit or miss episodes, but like I said, when it hits, it really hits. When it misses, they're not bad, but you know with all the creators behind this that they could have done a better job. Maybe that was down to the director, or maybe there's some production issues, I'm not too sure. All I can say is all the episodes are better than the movie they made from it, Demon Knight. Now, going to the second part of the Tales, and my personal favorite show, I think, from the 80s in terms of horror, is Tales from the Crypt. Okay, let's admit it. If you've watched it, well, many episodes are great, and we watched them for what they were. Most people watched it for the host, the Crypt Keeper. Such a fun host. And the design of the Keeper, the skeleton, and also where the skeleton was so well made. That graveyard was actually a miniature. In fact, all the scenes you see with the Crypt Keeper in it are all shot on a miniature smaller than a table, which is kind of cool. The jokes are really cheesy, like knee slapping bad, but they will still make you laugh. I also love the fact that this show was, adapted from the AC comic book, and I still have quite a few of those at home. Also, the guests. Let's just talk about the guests they have on this show. It's just simply amazing. First of all, just listen to some of these directors that recorded some of the episodes. Now, not only were the directors, they were also part of the show and acted in it as well. But let's go through a list of some of the directors, not all of them. Tom Holland, who did Child's Play. Tobe Hooper, who did The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Robert Zemeckis, who did Forrest Gump. And then we had William Friedkin, who did The French Connection. And the list goes on and on for directors. But then they also had famous actors who just showed up and did either bit parts or were the main actor in it. You had Kyle MacLachlan, who was Twin Peaks, Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks. He had Bob Hoskins, Michael J. Fox, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and perhaps one of the most influential actors who did actually direct an episode of this one as well, Tom Hanks. That's right, Tom Hanks acted and directed an episode of Tales from the Crypt. And if we're going on to just the list of actors, I mean, wow, it's amazing. Anthony Michael Hall, Billy Zane, Bill Paxton, Bobcat Goldthwait, Benicio del Toro, Brad Dourif, Michael Ironside, Patricia Arquette, Demi Moore, Tim Roth, Whoopi Goldberg, Kirk Douglas, William Shatner, Brad Pitt. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I can't go through all the list of famous actors who were either directing or acted in this series. And here's the amazing thing. It's not like all of these were kids. This is where they all got the start. Now, some of them did. But many of these actors were in their prime. I mean, this was the celebrity prime. You had Schwarzenegger just finished doing, it was either Predator or it could have been, I think it was just after Predator, just before it did Last Action Hero. You had Demi Moore, who just finished doing An Officer and a Gentleman. So these actors and actresses were in their prime. Look, it's worth watching the show, if anything, for the Crypt Keeper, but also the famous people in it. Now, some of the episodes range from funny to good to great to bad to weird to scary. But they're all well worth watching if by any reason is to try and find the Easter eggs and other celebrities maybe in the background, because it is one of those shows you can go back to and see things that you miss quite often. Personally, like I said, one of my favorites from the 80s. Now we're going to finish it off now with this show that I don't think many people actually knew about. It's just simply called Monsters. Who remembers this one? It's one of those other 2 seasons only from 1988 to 1990. I don't know what's with those 2 years for horror TV shows. It's kind of like the 27 Club, but for horror TV shows, I guess. But this one has such a great opening. In fact, it's one of my favorite openings full stop for any show across all genres. It's kind of like The Simpsons, but with monsters. It starts off with like an aerial shot of the world, and it zooms in into a city, and then into a small area, into a suburb, and then into a street, then into a house. And it's filled with a family of monsters preparing snacks and getting ready to sit down to watch TV show. And the looks of these monsters are just great. I love the overall design. And the feel is just almost comforting. You kind of want to snuggle up with these monsters and watch whatever they're watching. I just love it. It's just a great opening. Go watch it. Go watch the opening now. You don't need to watch the full episodes, even though they're great, but watch the opening at least. Anyway, as for the show itself, it's also great. It has some really good effects. Some very weird episodes, and that's kind of a theme for a lot of the 80s horrors, is kind of weird and strange. It's got really good practical effects, and it's well written. I highly recommend this show. It's also a bit like Tales from the Crypt. It has a host of famous actors in it, a lot of guest appearances, including people like Will Wheaton, Steve Buscemi, Meatloaf, Linda Blair, just to name a few. It's really worth watching. Like I said, the introduction's probably one of my favorites of all time. I just love it. It's kind of heartwarming. But the show itself is really worth watching. I do want to give a quick honorable mention before we leave here. And this is another one that I liked, but a lot of people really, really liked. And that was The Dark Room. Now, The Dark Room was, again, episodic. Well, it wasn't actually episodic. Had a lot of actors, but there was an overall storyline. But it also had its own episode with its own storyline as well. But it was really well done. It does feel very 80s, but a lot of people really, really like this, and I highly recommend it. So I enjoyed it. Again, it's not my favorite, but it's well worth watching. You do get some great actors in it as well, such as Billy Crystal, Emilio Estevez, Helen Hunt. Then you have like Joseph Stefano, who's the author. If you don't know who he is, look up his name, because I'm not going to go through all the stuff that he's done. Is kind of really amazing, actually. So that's it for now. I could keep on going on. There's so many other 80s horror TV shows that came out on that. So what I suggest is put down your phone, put it away. If you don't have a TV, then at least use your monitor for your computer. Or if you have a TV and a computer, hook it up. Go watch one of the shows on your TV in your living room on the sofa. Don't let the living room die, people. Get off your phones and try watching media somewhere else. All right, I'll speak to you on another episode. Bye.